The interesting thing is, and I had conversations with some people actually now are working for Bernie and had worked a little bit for Obama and about the idea of how disillusioned, like I was genuinely concerned after 2008 that the issue would be you have people who were promised something, nothing specific, but more of an idea of what was possible, and I was genuinely concerned that there would be like a lost generation of people who are just like, politics has disappointed me so much, I'm going to walk away. And I think really almost the opposite happened. It was like we can't rely on him. We have to do something more dramatic. I mean, I think that's where Occupy came from, and the whole impetus behind that. And it's stunning how far we've come since Occupy. Nobody talked about wealth inequality. Well, I mean, Bernie was, but I mean, no, it was just not mentioned in polite circles or even impolite circles.
Just left academics
nobody
for
gave
40 years.
Right.
We were going on about it.
Right.
But, you're absolutely right.
And I guess the question is this time, will that energy be harnessed, or at the very least enhanced, or in any way fed, as opposed to just sort of left on the vine to wither and die?
Yeah, well, I'd like to think I was a prophet, but I'm not. But I actually do believe, I'm going to be very clear about it, I think the one candidate who can harness it, engage it is the way I'd like to think of it, is Bernie Sanders. Look, I like Elizabeth Warren. I like her agenda, okay? But honestly, I don't think she can win in Wisconsin. I don't think she can engage young people and working people in the way that I know Bernie can.
Is that a charisma issue for you, or is it like a personal
Well, do you think Bernie
magnetism?
has charisma? It is a curious thing, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm asking, is there something specific about his program or his approach, or is it just something as a personality?
Can I go with my most outlandish theory? I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I just wonder to what extent, they see him as like the grandfather or great-grandfather, and they know America in the past was better than what they're about to inherit. And to them, is this their link? And they may not do the numbers, but is this their link to that moment of the generation? Look, the greatest generation, and what they accomplished in the 30s and 40s. Is it possibly that? That's my outlandish theory, okay? Otherwise, I think it's because
Joe Biden feels older. He's not, but he does feel older.
And he looks older,
right.
too. Has no and so on.
Yeah, but he doesn't carry any. I mean, there is something, I always joke, like Corbyn and Sanders are like these Obi-Wan Kenobi guys who like held a certain tradition.
Well, so from your perspective, to the extent that he can do that in Wisconsin and someone like Warren can't, that's a function just of his
Look, Sam,
personal...
it came to me as a surprise. I'm Jewish. I'm from the New York area. I'm in the Midwest. Could I have imagined an even older Jewish guy could possibly have come out to the Midwest and literally become a celebrity, a hero, that my students would be talking to me about a guy into his 70s like that? So there's something about it that it's we could come up with a million theories, but it happened.
All right, but I'm asking. Yeah. I mean, I'm just asking what your theories are in terms of like why in a place like Wisconsin, it has to do with him as an individual as opposed to.
Well, maybe who knows? Maybe it's because it comes out of Vermont,
right?
Even though he brings the Brooklyn with him, right? Maybe it's because as people discovered him, he spoke to them. I'll give you the best example that I remember from 2016. Hillary Clinton went to Four Freedoms Park here in the East River, here in New York City, to launch her campaign. And she never actually even mentioned what the Four Freedoms were, by the way, but she did it from there. But more importantly, the slogan was, I want to fight for you. I want to be your champion. And I knew it was all over, ultimately. And why? Because we don't want someone to fight for us. We want someone to encourage the fight in us. And that's where Bernie goes. When he was asked in the debates on television by Anderson Cooper or somebody, what are you going to do if the Republicans won't give way, or if the Democrats won't even give way on your policy? He said, that's when Americans have to step forward. They have to be outside the window. They have to let these folks know what it is that they elected me for and what it is they want. it's little expression, but I think it's very indicative. Not me, us. And I have more confidence that Bernie won't turn on Americans as abandon Americans as young Americans as Obama did, because Bernie's been doing this his whole life.
Right.
He doesn't come out of a Republican background. He comes out of a democratic socialist background. Sorry, I mean, I can't even believe I'm this enthusiastic about Bernie when I think back to how he didn't do in 2000, because I wanted him to cultivate the American imagination more than he did in 15 and 16. But this time, he just seems to have it.
Well, here he is actually with Hardwood. Is that his name? Hardwood?
No, Harwood.
Harwood.
Wait, what did you say?
From CNBC, and he answers that question that you just said. Like, what if you don't get Joe Manchin? What if Joe Manchin or Chris Coons, I guess, or Kristen Sinema, or
even Sherrod Brown,
or Sherrod Brown, although he's going to be the least of the problems. But
absolutely, I like Sherrod Brown,
right?
But he made some remarks recently that really unsettled me.
Well, we can talk about that in a moment. But here's what Bernie says he would do, which is specifically what Barack Obama would not do, even in the ACA fight, when Joe Lieberman was basically holding up the potential to buy into or to drop Medicare to 55, I think it was. Here is John Hardwood asking him that same question.
Even if you have a successful election and you get elected, even if it's successful to the point that Democrats win a small majority in the Senate, is Joe Manchin going to vote for your program? Yeah. Is John Tester going to vote
Damn
for
right
your program?
they will. You know why? And they're friends of mine.
Yeah.
Because we're going to go to West Virginia, which is maybe the poorest state, well, one of the poorest states in this country. Look, what happens right now, your average politician sits around and he or she thinks, they say, let's see, if I do this, I'm going to have the big money interest putting 30-second ads against me. So I better not do it. But now they're going to have to think, if I don't support an agenda that works for working people, I'm going to have President Sanders come into my state and rally working class people. You know what? At the end of the day, the 1% is very powerful. No denying that. Mm-hmm. The 99%, when they're organized and prepared to stand up and fight, they are far more powerful.
So let me ask you this in terms of like you obviously write quite a bit about FDR and Bernie specifically modeled this campaign in some respects after FDR by launching it in that way. How did FDR do that? What Bernie's talking about? Go into a state or go into were there examples of times where he went in and convinced reluctant?
Yes. So for example, he actually turned on the Democrats in Wisconsin in 1936 and basically backed the La Follette progressive Republicans. Look, the New Deal depended on a lot of senators, but there were 3 senators who were absolutely fundamental to making it happen. And oddly enough, 2 of them came out of the Republican tradition. One of them was Robert Wagner of New York, Democrat, one of the most progressive Democrats of the day. The other 2 were Bob La Follette Jr. of Wisconsin, not the father who was the famous capital P progressive, but very much, in fact, even more fighting in many ways than his father, especially regarding labor issues, okay? And then George Norris of Nebraska, another progressive Republican, and his thing was infrastructure. And that's why he and Roosevelt got together, because TVA is basically Norris's idea that Roosevelt was keen on because of what he did up in the St. Lawrence area here in New York State. So he knew how to engage those who were not necessarily Democrats. And by the way, sidebar to all this, in 1944, Wendell Willkie, who had been the Republican candidate in 40, and Franklin Roosevelt talked about creating, off the record, a new party, a liberal party, a liberal labor party. And Willkie said to him, well, what are we going to do with the Southern Democrats? And he said, let them go off and do what they want, okay? Right. And he figured there were Republicans who were still liberal at least. They were going to craft this new party. Willkie died very young, and Roosevelt died. Willkie died in his 40s. Roosevelt died in his early 60s. But it is the case that Roosevelt didn't hesitate to to turn away from Democrats who were not prepared to do it.
And we should say, this is at a time where 60 years prior, maybe less actually, 50 years, you had the Republican Party was very progressive. The public schools and all part of Reconstruction to rebuild society. A lot of the things like public schools were invested in, and all. But
Lincoln corresponded with Marx.
But
or at least you read him in the Herald Tribune.
But the things that you've just outlined, to the extent that you did, were transactional between a senator and the president, right? Like, you like infrastructure.
Yeah.
Where was the part where he marshals?
Okay, let me give you a beautiful example that will also fit in with the teacher strikes and those things. In 1934, the Kohler workers, you know, when you go flush your toilet and wash your hands, Kohler Company. Right? Okay. The Kohler workers went out on strike because the company was not going to recognize their effort to organize, which was supposedly part of the law now because of the National Industrial Relations Act. Roosevelt came to Green Bay, Wisconsin, which was a mere 60 miles north of Kohler, Wisconsin. And he gave a speech in August of that summer in which he talks about how immigrant generations and Americans had to fight for their rights as workers. And it was clearly his endorsement of the strike down there. And it was also his way of telling Wisconsin Democrats, you better do the right thing.
Right.
Because
Here's a shot across the bow.
Right. Okay. So that was an example of turning out. Okay. By the way, regarding polls, in 1936, one of the major polls conducted showed Roosevelt was going to lose the election. And he won by the greatest landslide up until that time, the greatest landslide Americans had ever seen up until that time, because they didn't realize that most people didn't have telephones, right? So they had called people who all had money, and everybody else, the working people, if they, they just didn't have it. So similarly, I'll hesitate on endorsing any of these polls until we see the outcome, perhaps, of Iowa. I mean, I think that Roosevelt knew how to mobilize very effectively and how to endorse pretty clearly. Also, when he ran in 32, most historians get this all wrong. They tell you, well, he didn't really know what he was going to do when he came into office. Bullshit. Sorry, Kenneth. Bullshit. Okay. Sorry.
He was going to do it.
Sorry. He, on the campaign trail, if you read his speeches, I'm putting together, by the way, a volume of FDR's speeches on democracy. They'll be out this spring. It's going to be FDR and democracy. He went state to state, and he talked about what he was going to do and about the imperative of people being organized, defending their rights. He even gave like a Sunday sermon in Detroit, okay, which clearly would have been heard by workers, because whenever he talked about what he would do, he didn't sound like the welfare president. That wasn't him. I don't even think he really cared for welfare. He wanted to create jobs, and he wanted to empower workers. Now, he hesitated on endorsing the Wagner Act at the time, not unlike Lincoln hesitated to endorse his own possibility of issuing the Emancipation Proclamation, because he needed to know that he had the people behind him.
Right.
And when he knew that in 35, when it was pretty clear, he did. So, I mean, look, can I say that Bernie will be another FDR? He doesn't have to be another FDR. He just has to be Bernie. Okay, but we have these precedents, and you said to what extent these things matter. I really do think, I'm going to repeat myself, I think Americans carry around that impulse planted way back, Thomas Paine and the promise in the Declaration, and the greatest of presidents have harnessed that. Read Lincoln, it's always the Declaration he goes back to. Actually, he would have liked to have done Thomas Paine more in his speeches, but Paine was a deist, and Lincoln was already attacked for his irreligious beliefs. Franklin Roosevelt definitely knew of Thomas Paine. He resisted. Then in 1941, he goes all out in a speech on the Washington's birthday address to rally Americans to be able to pursue the war effort. And by the way, Eleanor Roosevelt, who was very close to a lot of young socialists and communists back in the late 30s, she wrote a little book called The Moral Basis of Democracy in 1939, I think it was. And in there, the most referred to figure is Thomas Paine. Because these folks, they had a sense and a sensibility of what their fellow citizens yearned for and might well respond to. And I think Bernie's finally come to understand that. I think for too long he failed to do it. We've seen him doing it now.
Do you think Sam could get into trouble if he ran against Schumer quoting Thomas Paine too much?
No, I think
questions about his religious identity.
By the way, I'll move to New York and vote for him. I'll at least come and work for him.
Wow, major news. I can't believe you didn't give that breaking news drop.
I'm putting that in the war chest, and when I open it up in the spring of 2020, or 2021, I guess. I don't know when I'd have to declare. But
what does someone like Chuck Schumer harness in his fellow citizens?
he's got the Baileys in his corner.
The Baileys, my imaginary friends.
Right.
They don't care about all this Michigas.
Yeah.
More a harness on them than in them.
Harvey K., the book is Take Hold of Our History. Holding it here in my hand. Make America Radical Again. We'll, of course, put a link to it at majority.fm.
Thank you.
So awesome to have you in studio.
It's great we finally got to meet here in studio. I love it.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Indeed. All right, let's take a quick break.